As Philippine schools return to the traditional school calendar this year, one wonders beyond reversion in timetables whether decades of pivots in the country's educational system had brought us any closer to inclusive and equitable quality education. With us now in Thought Leaders is the president and co-creator of the Central Visayan Institute Foundation Dynamic Learning Program, 2010 Ramon Magsaysay awardee and physicist, Dr. Christopher Bernido. Dr. Chris, it's so good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Cathy.
And congratulations on 22 years of the Dynamic Learning Program.
Yes, I'm surprised.
Surprised, but
Well,
I'm sure very well rewarded. And also, of course, the co-creator, your late wife, Dr. Marivic.
Yes.
She's seen all 20 years of that
Yes,
for her passing.
that's true.
What made it durable, you think, for all of 22 years? 3 years of that lived in the pandemic.
Yes, performance indicators. Nothing more, nothing less. Some people ask me, how do you convince other schools to implement the Dynamic Learning Program or the DLP? I just tell them performance indicators. If you have a good performance in the National Career Assessment Exam, put a tarpaulin outside of your classroom. If you have DOST passers or UP college admission test, put a tarpaulin, and then the public will see it, and then the parents will think about it. So these are the performance indicators, and then students come in.
So where were we coming from in terms of performance indicators? Presumably, you've had to baseline where we were, specifically in Bohol, where you managed the Central Visayan Institute Foundation, where you started the Dynamic Learning Program and you saw that it worked.
Yes, well, I guess the baseline was the first 3 years in our school, 1999 to 2002. My wife and I were both teaching at the UP Diliman, and we came back to this school and managed the school in 1999, and we were still traditional. And we thought that...
Well, what is traditional? Is it all teacher-led?
Yes.
In the classroom, that kind of sort?
Yes, the one that you imagine. Yes, and so we thought that running a high school should be easy. We came from UP. We were both teaching grad school. And that then we started checking how many students passed the UP college admission test. First year, none. Second year, none. Third year, none. And my wife said, napakahirap naman pala pumasa sa UP. We thought that if 2 PhDs trained in the US and taught at UP go back to Hagna Bohol in the school, tomorrow there will be UPCAT passers. That's not true. So there has to be a change in the system, and that's when we implemented the Dynamic Learning Program in 2002.
So what is it that you found was the impediment? Why it was so difficult to get students from Bohol to pass an UPCAT test and get into your class in physics?
Well, the problem in our school is actually the same problem all over the country.
Which is?
Which is lack of qualified teachers, lack of textbooks, lack of classrooms, all these things. And so that was also happening in our school. And so the Dynamic Learning Program actually bypasses the lack of qualified teachers, lack of textbooks, lack of classrooms, and all these type of things. And so...
you said bypasses. That kind of sounds scary because these are the foundational elements of any learning, isn't it? You got to have good teachers. You got to have good textbooks.
Right.
We're wanting in those. But how does it work when it's the Dynamic Learning Program? What are the elements there that make it work?
I was a bit surprised that you felt scared. But of course, I should have expected that. Well, actually, in the Dynamic Learning Program, the job of the teacher is just shifted. Instead of the traditional where the teacher is lecturing all the time, 100% of the time, now the job of the teacher will be in the assessment. Teacher intervention in the DLP will only be limited to 30% of the period. And in fact, when the students do the learning activity sheets, there's no prior lecture. So when a new topic is being introduced at any grade level for any subject, there is no prior lecture. So the first encounter of the student to this new topic is through these learning activity sheets, which they have to copy. And then, only after they have gone through the learning activity sheets, does the teacher intervention come in. So teachers are still needed. They're still needed for assessment and all that stuff. It's just a paradigm shift. Their job is now shifted. So we still need teachers, and they are the unsung heroes in our country.
Of
actually.
course they are. And the learning activity sheets, the unsung partner of the teacher and the learner. What benefit has that had in ensuring that the performance indicators show that it worked? That for every student who underwent the learning activity sheets and the teacher intervention got in to the state university?
Well, the learning activity sheets is just one concept, one page. It's bite size, and so it's a step by step. So because the DLP is also addressed to the challenged learners, not only to the bright ones. So it's bite size. It's step by step to ensure that even the challenged learner, and they have to copy. That's one of a very important ingredient, and the feedback. Unlike in the traditional class, the feedback is just, the teacher would say recitation, but only the top teners would keep on answering the question. And then when the teacher say, so do you understand class? And the top teners would say, yes, ma'am, or sir. What would ma'am or sir do when the students say, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir? He or she moves on to the next topic, leaving behind the 80%. But here in the dynamic learning program, feedback is 100% in the sense that each and every student in the class will be going through the learning activity sheets, and they will be collected after the class, right, individually. So if there are 50 students, there will be 50 accomplished learning activity sheets. And the teacher will go through that, go through a survey, common mistakes, right approaches, and so on and so forth. And then the teacher can give the feedback. Only then, after they go through the learning activity sheet.
So it's a sort of a discipline that you're trying to create, this the culture of discipline and also patience coming from the teacher and learner. What sort of statistics then have you come back with? How many have gone and passed the UPCAT tests after they went through the activity sheets?
Well, I would say since 2002 when we started the DLP, I would say more than 200 students from our school have passed the UP College admission test. That's very untypical. Normally, for a remote school like ours, there would just be maybe this year one pass the UPCAT, next year none, the following year 3, then none again. But that was not the case. The first year after the DLP, we had 4 passers, and it just kept on increasing.
And then nationwide, you've seen the same kind of effect when you deployed that kind of pedagogy across different schools and universities.
Yes, there was also a question of scalability. So the DLP was actually implemented in 160 plus schools in Bohol, division province of Bohol, and the national achievement test shoot up the first 3 years. And the same with Basilan, 19 secondary schools in Basilan, it was implemented there thanks to Smart Communications and PLDT Smart Foundation. They were the ones who brought it to Basilan. That was their CSR. And also, the National Achievement Test scores really shot up. I mean, it went up quickly.
So 1,600 teachers trained nationwide in 22 years. And that's like 1,000 schools as well. Then came the pandemic. And upended everything in the education ecosystem. But how did the DLP work out? Considering you were working on learning activity sheets that can be taken home.
Right. No,
during the lockdown.
During the normal times, you can't take it home. You leave it in the classroom. But during the pandemic, March 2020, there was a lockdown. One of the DLP implementing school, Davao Christian High School, texted me. And he said, sir, ma'am, thank you very much for DLP. We had a smooth transition to the lockdown because the students were already used to independent learning. So the only crucial thing was to bring these learning activity sheets to the students. And they could do that either physically or via internet. And the students will accomplish, still going through the handwriting, copying the learning activity sheets, and the students will have to return to the teachers, to the school, the accomplished learning activity sheet. Even during the pandemic, and it's the same in our school, the learning was continuous, not much disruption.
But the ratio, is it still 70-30, 70% learner-led, 30% teacher-led? Or
Well,
did that change altogether because the student was just on their own, on their learning activity sheets, presumably for the rest of the day,
yes,
locked down at home?
right. They can come to school, so they do it at home. And so that ratio would change a little bit. But instead of teacher intervention, we designed special learning activity sheets which would complement or substitute the teacher intervention. Well, these learning activity sheets during the pandemic were returned, and if the teacher sees that, oh, everybody was able to answer, then the intervention is really not that necessary, and the specially designed learning activity sheet, which would substitute the teacher intervention, was just minimal.
Was the pace of adoption of the DLP even faster during the pandemic versus the 20 years that you've spent and deployed, scaled up the DLP nationwide?
Yes, suddenly DepEd was calling us.
Were they? Were they asking for the learning activity sheets?
No, they wanted to know how the DLP is done. This was the case for the NCR. The then superintendent, head of the NCR, called us. They wanted to know more about the DLP. And also Cebu City, they wanted to know more about the DLP because they think that it's, the activity sheets are digestible. It's one concept, one page. And I was also surprised by the comment of the superintendent from NCR at that time. He said that even after the pandemic, the DLP would still be necessary. And I said, why is that so? He said, well, he's an urban planner. He said that there would not be enough classrooms in the cities for all the students. So with the growing population and all that stuff. So DLP would still be needed because it could be done. Learning can be continuous even at home, for example.
It can, definitely can, but then we get into home support, the conducive environment that's so important for a learner. I picked up a study by the Philippine Institute of Development Studies. It had a report noting that what really affected the students in the lower socioeconomic classes, especially during the pandemic, is the lack of quality home support and less conducive learning environments. So that's a bit of a challenge if, yes, we have a shortage of classrooms, but no, not all homes are that supportive of a learner's needs. What interventions are there that's tucked into the DLP that can support a learner needing this kind of help?
It's doable. And there's no need for parental guidance or some of the modules of the DepEd need. They were designed to have lectures, and they were just dumped into the students. And so the parents are in a quandary. But in the DLP, it's bite-sized, it's doable, right? And if something is doable, the parents would also cooperate. And you can actually talk with the parents that if you want your future as a family improve, you have to sacrifice something like after the meal, use the dining table as a study table of the child, something like that. You can talk to them, but the task given should be doable and understandable. The task is clear.
The task is clear, and the deliverables of the school authorities remain the same. There's still that the parent, teacher, administrator interaction that shouldn't go away.
No.
Even as we give all the independence to the learner themselves. There is a study by the World Bank that talked about school closures, that the school closures in the Philippines during COVID inflicted what it called significant learning losses on the country's students.
Yes.
Not even income, not even school quality or internet access had any significant impact than the school closures. If, for instance, we were to focus more on home learning, might that compromise the quality of education that we give today's learners?
Depends on what you're using. If you go traditional or you go DLP, that's the big difference. The DLP has been called as a resilience program, disaster resilient program, because there were many examples during the siege in Zamboanga. There was a 2-week war in Zamboanga City. But the students implementing the DLP were still learning because they just sent these activity sheets to the students. They were staying at home. The same with the typhoons, Undoy and all that stuff. I think it was in Undoy where the houses of the teachers were destroyed and so on. But then, the students were still learning because they came to school. The teacher was not around because the teacher lost his or her house. But with the learning activities, learning was ongoing even if the teachers were not around. So it's a disaster resilient program. It can also be used in homeschools and so on and so forth.
So when we talk about that digital gap that President Marcos had mentioned in his State of the Nation address, what to you does that mean when you put a digital layer over learning activity sheets that are pretty much non-digital?
Right.
It's cheap and cheerful stuff
Yeah.
that go beyond equipping a classroom full of digital tools,
Yes.
which is the government's goal.
Yes.
How does that then complement? Or might it contradict wherever we're going next for the education reforms?
No contradiction really, because the core would still be there. The learning activity sheets or LAS would still be there. Like maybe a good example would be Davao Christian High School, which is a rich Chinese school with internet connection and all the stuff. They did DLP during the pandemic, so they sent the LAS via internet because they can do it. That's digital and so on. Contrast that with our school, where 85% of the students do not have internet connectivity. But learning was still ongoing because we gave physical, we risographed the LAS. We had 18 different drop-off points in the next town and so on. So we delivered this LAS physically every week. And while we deliver, we also collect the accomplished activity sheets done by the students the past week. So learning was ongoing. So in Davao Christian High School, they did it digitally. In our case, we have to risograph, but the common denominator is the LAS still there. And in both cases, Davao Christian or our school, the students still have to write down the LAS, answer the questions to be returned to the teacher.
And you do cite the importance of the writing portion in the learning activity sheet because of what is called the copy and paste culture that we want the learners to avoid getting into. But how? In the digital age, when everyone else is exposed to digital technology, is it just a matter of time before that culture actually just becomes so pervasive? Not everybody can learn how to write the proper A's and E's because everyone's just typing away or maybe just even clicking on their phones.
You mentioned about non-readers or non-writers, whatever. In our school, we have a very liberal admission. In grade 7, we actually accept even non-readers, right? So we accept almost everybody. You'd be surprised that from grade 7 they enter. By the time they reach grade 9, when the National Career Assessment exam is given, nobody scores below average. So what happened to non-readers or non-writers, right? But you see, the point is that the DLP can cure it. The non-readers, it can cure it. And as evidenced by the National Career Assessment exam results. So we often feel that, elementary is too early, right? Let them play. High school is the crucial part. College is too late. So high school is the critical part when it comes to education. That's my feeling.
Yeah, but the copy and paste culture, I mean, can that not be, it's a fact of life. It's something that we eventually have to accept with the digitalization in the classrooms. Eventually, everyone's going to have a go at a device. So much for the learning activity sheets. I'm
Yes.
going to go and type whatever I need to on this device.
Well, that copy and paste culture where learning is not really deep is a problem for those doing traditional teaching. But if you adopt DLP, that problem goes away. Because in the DLP, the student is required to write, right? It's a requirement. Otherwise, they don't pass. So the antidote to this copy and paste culture without deep learning is really the DLP, the writing part of the DLP. They'll be forced to write without any prior lecture, and they will encounter, new things there. Yeah, so that's it. The trick, that's why some people ask us, so what's the strategy in the DLP? And we often say, well, our strategy is medieval. Because in the medieval ages, the monks write down the Bible. They copy the Bible by hand. So it's a medieval strategy. So we implemented the writing component of the DLP from the start since 2002. But recently, in the past 10 years, there are a lot of neuroscientific studies which prove that writing is more superior when it comes to learning than keyboarding, for example. There are many, many studies of different ages. So it validated the strategy that we had from the very beginning.
Medieval strategy meeting generative AI.
Right,
Medieval strategy meeting generative AI.
right.
That's going to be pretty tough as we're getting into artificial intelligence that
Yes.
actually can do everything that probably a learning activity sheet can deliver to a learner. How then can independent learning progress under generative AI?
Well, you see, as I mentioned, the danger of AI, this copy and paste culture, is problematic for schools implementing the traditional way of learning. But once you adopt the DLP, writing is non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable. So the student has to write, and you see this copy and paste school, this AI and all this thing. I'm really afraid that the next generation will be lazy. They would not be a critical thinker. They would just, they would be lazy. They just push a button and they get the answer, right? But in the DLP, because they learn a new topic by copying, and they have to comprehend and do some analytical thinking and solve by their own. That's the antidote to being lazy, for example.
Is generative AI to you a collaborator or a competitor?
Well,
how do you see it?
They are a good source, for example, because the students would write and copy, and there are questions there. And some LAS would actually require the students to Google, for example, the answers. That's also done. And in creating the LAS, it also helps the subject teacher, expert teacher, to create the LAS, but not yet at this stage because the teachers are still needed. Because if you prompt the AI or ChatGPT to create an LAS, it's still not age appropriate, it's still not that accurate, and AI has a tendency to hallucinate. So the subject teachers still have to check for the age appropriateness, accuracy of the LAS to be given to the students. So AI helped as a first approximation in making the LAS, for example. But expert teacher, subject teacher are still needed.
So can we then say that DLP is also Gen AI resilient, as you've talked about resilience in the pandemic?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, okay, can you think of any other learning program which is an antidote to this copy and paste culture which makes people lazy? Tell me, I would be happy to hear. I'm biased, of course, but to me, the only learning program that would be an antidote to this copy and paste culture would be the DLP, where students are asked to write, where writing is an important component. This medieval strategy is an important component.
Let's talk about those weak links and bottlenecks. Interesting that you stated in one of your papers back in October 2020 at the height of the pandemic lockdowns, the chain from high school to graduate school all the way up to a young scientist's career is replete with potential weak links and bottlenecks. Is this still very much true 4 years on, or have you seen changes since?
Well, it still exists, really, from high school all the way to grad school, especially in a third world country like the Philippines. There are a lot of dysfunctional systems and agencies, for example. So it's still...
Such as? Could you name one?
Well, for example, for example, we say that to increase the number of scientists in our country, they would give scholarships, right? DOST. And so the DOST gives huge amount of scholarship, but there are no takers. So
why not?
Why not? Because although the intention was good, there are unintended consequences. And for example, in the DOST, if you sign a contract, there's a return service of 1:1. I'm a scholar for 1 year, and then you have to have a return service for another year. So by the time you get your PhD, you have 9 years of required return service to the Philippines. You cannot go abroad. The NBI will block you, and so on and so forth. So so this would discourage the students to get a DOST scholarship to go all the way up to PhD, for example. So, that's problematic. I mean, the original intention was good, but there was an unintended consequence that would sabotage the
So
original.
what are you now proposing then? No return service or maybe reduced return service requirement?
The proposal is that you are a DRST scholar in the undergraduate, so you owe the government. But once you enroll the MS and become a scholar again, that erases your college return service. Then you're a scholar for 2 years as a master's student, so you owe the government 2 years. But if you continue to PhD and become a DOST scholar, that should erase your utang, your return service of 2 years. And so that would minimize, so it would, instead of 9 years, you only have maybe 3 years of return service. And that would be a pool for students to continue all the way to PhD from the BS. But at the moment, they don't want to.
Why not?
Because of the return service, you know.
Right. I mean, but the government then, I mean, it's been a proposal that's been there, and that's
what I said?
Yes. Or is that a proposal that you're just about to make?
It's about to make. There's a letter that has
right?
been submitted, and we do hope that this would be implemented and would be taken up and discussed.
Well, from the president's view, there have been improvements. He cited a couple of them: our system of higher education gaining international recognition. He also cited that 8 out of 10 graduates in TVET have a high employability rate, and that TVET is now incorporated into the senior high school program. Are we not any more employable now than we were before? What are you seeing from your end?
Well, that's good that 8 out of 10 are getting employed, but that's the technology vocational type of thing.
Which is different from what you're proposing. It's more of a STEM graduate.
Yeah,
kind of
STEM graduate.
path.
The problem with that is if it's technological training, right? You become unemployed after 3 or 5 years because the technology is changing. For example, if I enroll in TESDA, as an example, I'm very good in repairing these big television. You're probably familiar. So I'm an expert, and I get hired. But then flat TVs come in, and I don't know how to repair it. Then you become unemployable. So the estimate is that the younger generation would have to learn 3 to 5 different skills in their lifetime because of the changing landscape, and the job needed in 2030 has not yet been imagined. So if it's technical vocational, I mean, that's short-lived. Okay, that's fine. You get employed. But on the other hand, the sciences do not really change. Technology changes very quickly, but the science that bring us to Mars today is still the same Newton's laws that was invented in the 1600s. It does not change. So you're good in science, you survive. But if it's only technology, you might have to learn a new skill.
But if we refer to PISA, we're not even good in science. And in terms of proficiency, I mean, the Philippines still ranked among countries producing the lowest proficiency for 15-year-olds, not only in science, but also in reading and math. And this is just an assessment made by the Program for International Student Assessment in 2022.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
They're not using DLP.
Not yet.
Not yet.
What benefits would it have? An immediate benefit, perhaps? How much time would it take for us to improve our rankings if, for instance, we use DLP as the template to improve our scores in PISA?
Okay, let me take, for example, if I remember correctly, Davao Christian High School. They started the DLP in 2005. A few years later, only 3% of their examinees belong to the top 1%. And then a few years down the road, it became 20%. And after maybe 10 years, more than half of their examinees belong to the top 1% in the whole country. It's not overnight because the habits of the mind, it has to be built. So it's not overnight, but it has to be started.
So you're proposing a non-traditional sort of a setup in schools. Forget about traditional, let's do alternative and make that the main mode of teaching. Is that what you're proposing then?
Yes, I am.
And have you brought it up to the Department of Education and CHED? And what have their responses been?
Sometimes they say it's a fortress. The DepEd is a fortress. And so, but I hope things will change. Like, for example, there's a group from EDCOM 2 who will be visiting our school in July 30. I don't know what will come out of that, but it's a good start.
It's a fortress. I come back to a part in the paper that you co-wrote with Dr. Marivic where you said, somebody you know mentioned that 99% of science in the Philippines is politics.
That's correct.
What does that mean and in what context? Now that you mentioned Fortress, in another government agency very much involved in the educational reforms of the country.
Well, that 99% has probably gone down. That statement was in 1986, EDSA time. But you see, the scientific community is so small that we essentially know each other. And so sometimes refereeing a project or a paper, it's good to have to be blind on who is proposing the project so that your assessment will be objective. But since the community is so small and we know each other, that it colors your judgment. For example, you might hate that person. So even if the project is good, then it's politics. I mean, you find mistakes and all that stuff. So it's a function of the size of the community and function of maturity. And hopefully that would change.
But it has, you said it was in 96, so
86.
it's no longer 99%. So where are we in that percentage? And is it a less difficult fortress to penetrate?
It's a less difficult fortress to penetrate. If I have to guess, I mean, it's just a personal wild guess, I would say 30 to 40% now.
So it's
Politics.
a little bit more workable.
Yeah.
So are you a little bit more accepting then of the changes that we're seeing right now in, say, K to 12? I mean, first off, were you in favor of the K to 12 program?
No.
Why not?
Yeah, we were. In fact, Ateneo de Manila, I think, was not also in favor. But we could, you know, you do a bad thing, right? An example, you teach a child piano and you teach it very badly, right? 4 years of bad teaching. You would like to add 2 more years to that? Make it 6 years of bad teaching? That's disaster. That's just an analogy.
So now that they're working out matatag, and that's sort of like changing all the misplaced learning competencies from kinder to grade 10, is that something that the government should pursue now?
Well,
Under
matatag.
Sunny Angara?
Yeah, matatag is just a name. And in fact, since for the past half a century, the DepEd has been going through reforms. In 1973, big reform 82, big reform 2013, big reform. We've been oscillating from one learning, from disciplinal approach to spiral approach and so on and so forth. But what was constant? Our performance in PISA or TIMSS, which is always, we were always the cellar dweller. So, I don't know, we give names. I don't know if the changes are substantial. Wait and see. I mean, I'm a little bit...
So in all those reforms, what worked well for the Philippines? Or perhaps a combination of some of the reforms along with DLP. What are you seeing is the ideal template then? As we're talking about a president talking about education reforms through technology.
Well, let me mention something which is a bit of an insight, but let's see. Out of 100 students that enroll in grade 1, only half would enter high school, right? You're talking about the formal education. What happens to the other half, right? So that's where the alternative learning system, or ALS, comes in, which is very, very important because probably that's bigger than those in the formal education. And these people, not educated in a sense, will vote for your mayor, for your president, for your senator. So don't complain, for example. So we really have to educate them. But most of them are outside of the formal educational system. And the Department of Education should really seriously think about the ALS to help those outside of the formal education. That's more than half of the population of those in a cohort.
So ALS with DLP and a bit of the traditional that we're now into.
The DLP is now being applied in ALS, especially in Region 10. Almost the whole of Region 10, and it has been transported to Samar. I would like to mention Dr. Butch Mahinay, who's a champion in this. So they are very good. In fact, it's the ALS which accepted DLP first, or at least quickly. And so, yeah, DLP in ALS, DLP in the formal education.
There is the other element of teachers, very important,
Yeah.
the foundational element, as
Yeah.
the president had mentioned in his State of the Nation address. He cited more benefits and support for teachers. He cited better allowances, expanding the progression of their careers. He didn't want anybody retiring just as teacher one. But some of the teachers have actually asked for a substantial pay increase. What do you make of how the president reacted to what
Well,
they actually wanted?
The teachers deserve more. As I mentioned, they are our unsung heroes in this country. You should give them as much as you can to them, because their role is still important. In the DLP, their role is just shifted, right, from lecturing to assessment. But the teacher's role is very, very important for the survival of our country, next generation. So give them as much as they want. That's my feeling. I mean, after all, there's a lot of corruption, money going somewhere else, and all that stuff, right?
But do expenditures really guarantee better student performance? Because when you look at, let's say, huge budgets, they don't necessarily produce better outcomes, do
True.
they?
True. Because they're still traditional.
So you're saying traditional is the culprit?
Well, we have been traditional since time immemorial, and our performance in the PISA and the teams are still the same since time immemorial. What do you think?
Which brings me to budgets. I'm not thinking of money right now. The Philippines allotting just about 3 to 4% of its GDP for the education budget. The global standard, as I understand, is 6%. It brings to mind the received understanding that as we spend less, we perform poorly.
Well, again, I'm sorry for going back again. You see, it reminds me of Henry Ford. When he designed the Model T automobile, he had some design requirements. He said that I would like to design an automobile which is small enough where one person could take care of it, big enough such that the family would all fit in, and the third is cheap enough such that my employees could also afford it. It's the same with the DLP. We have some design requirements, and the design requirements is to allow the most number of students to learn deeply in the quickest time possible, and cheap enough so that any nation who would like to adapt it could afford it. Those are the design requirements. That's talking about money. Cheap enough, but effective.
So we can't stick with 3 to 4% and be okay.
I guess so.
Let's just change the way we spend it. That's what you're saying.
Right.
And like you mentioned, go away from traditional and do ALS and a bit of DLP.
Yeah.
And that's the formula. For a physicist as you, into Philippine Science High Schools, pretty interesting that it's been with us for 60 years. It's grown from just Philippine Science High School. Anybody you speak with, a parent, would proudly say, my child is enrolled in Pisay.
Yes.
But I was really surprised when I read your paper and saw that their average doesn't actually go above the international mean.
Yes.
What is causing that substandard performance in what we know to be the prime, the cream of the crop here in the Philippines?
I think there are several factors, but I think one factor is this. Students who enter Philippine Science High School are the top in grade 6, like top 1% maybe. But then they enter Philippine Science High School. But who is teaching them? What's the profile of their teachers? What's the profile of the teachers, which you can check in all 16 different campuses of Philippine Science High School? They're mostly education majors. That's not enough to deal with gifted children. My feeling is that they should be taught by PhDs who won't be bullied by these bright young kids.
They do get bullied.
Oh yes, many cases. I could tell you 20 incidences after the show. Just kidding. Yeah, they do get bullied. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, that even 2 years old can manipulate and bully adults, right? They manipulate. So more so for 7-year bright students, gifted children, and there's a lot of them, and they can really bully the teacher. Philippine Science High School is no exception. But the DLP protects the teacher from being bullied because it's independent learning. The subject teacher is not there. And at the same time, the DLP protects the students from being bullied by the teacher because there's minimal teacher-student interaction. That's one benefit, I would say.
Let's go back to what you said about the PhDs, the path towards PhDs, which really take us into the scientific manpower conversation. We'd love to have that for our country, because that's the only way that the economy progresses. But there is an issue of brain drain. As we know, we teach them, but they go away.
True.
And another country or countries benefit, which is fine, and because we intend that we're hoping that someday they'll come back.
Yeah.
Have the programs been enough? The government's program of the Balik Scientist program, for instance, has that been enough to bring them back for good?
Yes, well, there's the Balik Scientist program, but there are not enough takers from those coming from outside.
Is it return service again?
No.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with return service, but they're free as a bird. Some of them, after they're almost retired, they feel like they have to give back to the country. But Balik Scientist has been there, and it has been helpful. And some have indeed come back to the Philippines, settled here, and that's very, very, very helpful. So Balik Scientist is one. The other thing is the individual universities themselves should have enough reward system for returnees. Like, for example, University of the Philippines, if they recruit a new PhD or postdoc from abroad, automatically they give a research grant of, I think, 2.5 million. They don't have to apply. It's automatic. Another 500,000 for relocation, things like that. Another million, for example, to bring some of their friends to the Philippines. So that's an individual initiative by UP Diliman. And that's good for young PhDs who would like to return to the Philippines. So things like that. That's a template which should be followed by other universities. They really have to don't recruit PhDs and give them a rank of instructor 1. I mean, that's an insult. And that's still happening because a lot of state universities are really, I don't know what's happening. It's a dysfunctional. They give these young PhDs a rank of instructors and so on.
But that is because of the ecosystem. It hasn't really matured enough to give them the support and the infrastructure they need. It's sort of a chicken and egg situation. Do they have to come back so that ecosystem can be built? Or can we build it now? From the learnings we've had from those who have come back intentionally for good, but had to go away because there wasn't enough support.
Build the good ecosystem now, and you'll get more young PhDs. Build it now. We should have built it 10 years ago, for example. So they could keep on coming, and they will be the ones who will be running the system with new ideas, young bright minds, and that would sustain a good ecosystem, for example.
Before we go, as you're a physicist and you're coming from the sciences, you got into education, and all that you've learned, oftentimes we cite that education is a key pillar for economic prosperity and growth. What is in it for the Filipino person, for the one who lives in the Philippines and who probably wants to advance in a certain career, certain path?
We borrow a lot of wrong templates. I mean, they are good templates for their own country, but just blindly borrowing a template to solve a problem which might not match our own culture is very dangerous. So, and we fall into that trap oftentimes. So that's my only message. We have to think deeply, look at ourselves, and in fact, create our own template, original template with naangkop sa Bayan Pilipino. That's the only thing I can say. Try not to just import. Sometimes we have a lot of projects and loans and so on, and with the project are consultants, foreign consultants, who sometimes think that they know better what's good for the Philippines. And since it's part of a loan and big money, then we follow what the consultant says. the template that they have in mind, which is not may be good for our country, for example. That's just a...
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Chris, and I wish you well in the DLP and the path that it should
Thank you,
go
Cathy.
in the
Thank
next
you.
20 or so years.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
the time.
Thank you very much.
And catch us again next Thursday at 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. And if you haven't done so yet, like or follow my social media pages. I'm Cathy Yang, and this is Thought Leaders.